The rifle looked like something pulled from a garage sale. Scratched wooden stock, faded bluing on the barrel, and scope rings held together with electrical tape that had seen better decades. While around her, million-dollar precision instruments gleamed under the California sun. Sarah Mitchell cradled her beaten Remington 700 like it was made of gold. The elite shooters setting up their equipment barely glanced her way, but when they did, the smirks were impossible to miss. Custom carbon fiber stocks, titanium actions, computer-calculated ballistic systems. This was serious money meeting serious skill. And then there was Sarah, looking like she'd wandered in from a hunting trip gone wrong. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She didn't notice the snickering at first, too focused on checking her rifle's condition after the drive from her gun shop in Barstow. But when Sergeant Jake Parker loud whispered to his teammate about bringing museum pieces to a gunfight, Sarah's jaw tightened just enough for someone watching closely to notice. What none of them knew was that this particular museum piece had ended threats at distances they could only dream of reaching. What they couldn't see, hidden under layers of desert dust and years of wear, was a scope that had never missed when it mattered most. The morning sun was already brutal at Camp Pendleton West, turning the shooting range into a furnace that tested both equipment and endurance. Heat waves danced off the concrete firing positions, distorting the view downrange, where targets waited at distances that separated the elite from the merely skilled. The annual Desert Eagle Challenge drew the best military marksmen from across the services, each one carrying rifles that cost more than most people's cars and reputations built on years of competition victories. Sarah Mitchell pulled her truck into the competitor parking area, the engine ticking as it cooled in the merciless heat. Around her, other vehicles spoke of serious investment in the shooting sports. Custom gun trucks with climate-controlled storage, team vans wrapped in sponsor logos, trailers that housed entire mobile workshops. Her faded blue pickup looked like it belonged in the civilian lot, not among the machines of war that surrounded it. She stepped out slowly, methodically, the way someone moves when every motion has been calculated for efficiency. At 45, Sarah carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of making shots that couldn't be missed. Her graying blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothing was practical rather than tactical worn. Jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and boots that had seen more miles than most odometers. Everything about her appearance suggested someone who belonged at a local rifle club, not competing against the military's finest marksmen. The rifle case she pulled from the truck bed was as unassuming as everything else about her. Black polymer, standard latches, the kind of case you could buy at any sporting goods store. No custom foam, no team stickers, no indication that what lay inside had once been the difference between life and death in places that didn't appear on any official maps. As she walked toward the range control building, Sarah passed clusters of competitors making final preparations. Their conversations were a mix of technical jargon and good-natured trash talk, the kind of banter that marked professionals comfortable in their element. Barrel harmonics, environmental corrections, ammunition lot numbers. These men and women spoke the language of precision with the fluency of masters. "Did you see Martinez's new setup?" one shooter was saying, admiring a rifle that looked more like a piece of aerospace equipment than a weapon. "Custom everything, even the screws are titanium. Drop 30 grand on that build." His teammate whistled appreciatively. "Worth every penny if it gets in that half-minute consistency." At these distances, equipment matters as much as skill. They noticed Sarah passing and automatically included her in their assessment, the way competitors size up new threats. What they saw didn't concern them much. Middle-aged woman, basic gear, no visible sponsors or team affiliations. Probably someone's guest shooter, maybe a civilian contractor trying to prove a point. The kind of participant who made these competitions interesting for about one round before reality set in. The range control building was a testament to military efficiency: concrete block construction, painted in regulation colors, with windows that had seen better decades and air conditioning that fought a losing battle against the desert heat. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over tables covered in registration paperwork, ammunition inspection stations, and displays of past competition winners. The walls were lined with photographs of legendary shots, record-setting groups, and champions who had earned their place in marksmanship history. Corporal Tommy Jensen looked up from his computer screen as Sarah approached the registration desk. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of enthusiasm that came from being assigned to work with elite shooters. His uniform was crisp, despite the heat, and his demeanor suggested someone who took pride in running a smooth operation. "Morning, ma'am. Here for the Desert Eagle Challenge?" His tone was polite but carried a hint of uncertainty, as if he was still processing whether she belonged there. Sarah placed her paperwork on the counter with the same precision she applied to everything else. Each document was folded exactly once, arranged in the order requested, filled out in neat block letters that would have made a drill instructor proud. Sarah Mitchell, Civilian Contractor Division. Jensen scanned the forms with practiced efficiency, checking boxes and verifying information against his computer database. Behind him, other range personnel were coordinating the day's events, their conversations a steady background of logistical details and safety protocols. The smell of gun oil and coffee permeated the air, mixed with the faint scent of desert sage that somehow found its way through the building's seals. "Looks like everything's in order," Jensen said, stamping the forms with official finality. "You'll be shooting on Relay 3, starting at position 14. Equipment inspection is mandatory before you can proceed to the line." He gestured toward a station where Master Sergeant Rita Lopez was examining rifles with the thoroughness of someone who understood that safety failures at this level could be catastrophic. Lopez was a compact woman with sharp eyes and hands that moved with the confidence of someone who had handled every type of firearm the military produced. Her inspection process was methodical, checking everything from bolt operation to scope mounting, ensuring that each rifle met the stringent safety standards required for precision competition. Sarah carried her case to the inspection table and opened it with practiced efficiency. Inside, nested in basic foam padding, lay the rifle that would change everything. The Remington 700 looked even more humble in the harsh fluorescent light, its wooden stock showing every ding and scratch accumulated over decades of use. The scope mounted above it was substantial but far from modern, with adjustment turrets that had been worn smooth by countless clicks and a finish that spoke of serious field time. Lopez's eyebrows rose slightly as she lifted the rifle from its case. This wasn't what she expected to see at an elite competition. The rifle was clean and obviously well maintained, but it belonged to an earlier era of precision shooting. No carbon fiber here, no titanium components, no computer-assisted anything. Just steel and wood and glass, combined in proportions that had worked when her grandfather was learning to shoot. "This is an interesting choice," Lopez said diplomatically, beginning her inspection with the kind of professional courtesy that masked deeper thoughts. She checked the bolt operation, examined the trigger mechanism, verified that the scope was properly mounted. Everything functioned as it should. But she couldn't hide her puzzlement at why someone would bring such equipment to this level of competition. Around them, other competitors were going through the same process with rifles that represented the absolute cutting edge of marksmanship technology. Carbon fiber stocks that eliminated temperature variations, actions machined to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch, triggers that broke like glass at precisely calibrated weights. These were machines built for one purpose: placing bullets exactly where the shooter intended, regardless of external conditions. Sergeant Jake Parker approached the inspection station with his own rifle, a custom build that had cost him 2 years of careful saving and looked like it belonged in a museum of future weapons. The stock was a work of art in carbon fiber and exotic composites. The action was a masterpiece of precision manufacturing, and the scope cost more than most people's annual salaries. He glanced at Sarah's rifle with the kind of expression usually reserved for roadkill. "Wow," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "That's really something. I haven't seen one of those in competition since, well, ever." His tone carried the particular condescension that marked someone who believed equipment determined outcomes. "You know they make modern rifles now, right? Like with actual technology?" His teammate, Specialist Marcus Webb, joined the conversation, with a grin that suggested he enjoyed watching others squirm. "Maybe she's going for the vintage division? Is there a vintage division?" He looked around theatrically, as if searching for information about a category that didn't exist. Lopez finished her inspection without commenting on the conversation, but her expression had shifted slightly. She'd been around long enough to know that assumptions could be dangerous, especially when it came to people who carried themselves with Sarah's particular brand of quiet confidence. The rifle passed inspection with no issues, whatever its age. It was mechanically sound and properly maintained. "You're cleared for competition," Lopez announced, handing Sarah a small sticker. That would allow her to proceed to the firing line. "Good luck out there." Sarah nodded her thanks and began packing her rifle away. As she did, she noticed that her scope had attracted more attention than she'd intended. The electrical tape holding the rings together was peeling slightly, revealing glimpses of metal underneath that caught the light in ways that suggested quality far beyond the rifle's humble appearance. For just a moment, as the tape shifted, something became visible, a small etching in the scope ring that looked like wind spread over crossed rifles, so faint it might have been a trick of the light. Master Sergeant Lopez caught that glimpse and froze. Her hands stopped moving, her breath caught almost imperceptibly, and her eyes locked onto that tiny symbol with recognition that sent ice through her veins despite the desert heat. She'd seen that marking before, in classified briefings she wasn't supposed to remember, in reports that technically didn't exist. The scope wasn't old, it was legendary. Lopez tried to get a better look, but Sarah had already closed the case and was turning to leave. The moment passed so quickly that Lopez almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. Almost. But 20 years in military intelligence had taught her to trust her instincts, and her instincts were screaming that she'd just seen something that changed everything about this competition. As Sarah walked toward the competitor staging area, conversations followed her with the kind of barely concealed amusement that marked predators who'd identified easy prey. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Desert Eagle Challenge was serious business, with national team selections on the line and reputations built over years of dedicated training. Showing up with equipment that belonged in a museum wasn't just optimistic, it was naive to the point of embarrassment. The staging area buzzed with activity as competitors made final preparations for the morning relay. Rifles were being fine-tuned, ammunition sorted by lot numbers, weather conditions analyzed with instruments that measured everything from humidity to barometric pressure. These weren't casual shooters hoping to get lucky, they were professionals who understood that precision at extreme distances required control of every possible variable. Sarah found an empty spot at one of the preparation tables and began her own routine, which was notably different from the high-tech preparations surrounding her. No electronic devices, no complex calculations, no last-minute equipment adjustments. She simply checked her rifle's zero with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else, loaded her ammunition with practiced efficiency, and settled into the kind of calm focus that couldn't be bought or taught. The morning proceeded with the mechanical efficiency of a well-run military operation. Relay after relay of shooters took their positions, engaged targets at distances that tested the absolute limits of human and equipment capability, and were scored with digital precision that left no room for argument. The best shooters consistently grouped their shots within areas smaller than a dinner plate at ranges where most people couldn't even see the targets clearly. By the time Sarah's relay was called, the competition had established its rhythm. She walked to position 14 carrying her rifle with the same casual confidence she'd shown all morning, seemingly unaware that she'd become something of a spectacle. Other competitors had started pointing her out to teammates, and the gallery of observers had grown as word spread about the woman with the antique rifle, who somehow thought she belonged among the military's elite marksmen. The target's downrange shimmered in heat waves that made precise shooting a test of both skill and patience. At 1,000 yards, even the largest targets appeared as tiny dots that demanded absolute precision in both equipment and technique. Wind flags along the range moved in patterns that told stories of atmospheric conditions, and experienced shooters read those flags like text that revealed the secrets of successful long-range engagement. Sarah took her position on the firing line with movements that were economical and purposeful. No wasted motion, no unnecessary adjustments, no signs of the nervousness that typically marked first-time competitors at this level. She settled behind her rifle as if it were the most natural position in the world, her body conforming to equipment that fit her like custom tailoring despite its humble appearance. The range commands echoed across the facility with military precision, each instruction delivered in the clipped cadence that left no room for misinterpretation. Relay 3, you have 10 minutes for unlimited sighting shots. Commence firing when ready. Around her, other competitors began the careful process of confirming their zeros and reading wind conditions. The sound of precision rifles filled the air, sharp cracks that spoke of carefully developed handloads and meticulously tuned equipment. Each shot was followed by immediate analysis through spotting scopes, with adjustments made based on impact locations measured in fractions of inches. Sarah chambered around with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd performed the action thousands of times under conditions far more stressful than any competition. Her rifle came to her shoulder like an extension of her body, and through her scope, the distant target took on clarity that transformed it from an abstract dot into a clearly defined objective. The wind flags told her a story of atmospheric conditions that most shooters would have found challenging. A steady crosswind from the left, with gusts that created opportunities for those patient enough to read the patterns correctly. Temperature variations that would affect trajectory in ways that demanded compensation, based on experience rather than calculation. She settled into her shooting position with the kind of stillness that marked true professionals. No fidgeting, no last-minute adjustments, no visible signs of the tension that gripped most competitors facing their first shots of the day. Through her scope, she could see not just the target, but the entire environment that would influence her bullet's flight wind patterns, heat waves, the subtle movements of vegetation that revealed atmospheric conditions invisible to less experienced eyes. The other shooters in her relay were well into their sighting process, making careful adjustments based on their initial impacts and preparing for the scored portion of the competition. Their equipment sang with precision, each shot producing groups that would have been impossible with lesser rifles, each impact analyzed and corrected with scientific methodology. Sarah took her time, reading conditions with patience that seemed almost meditative compared to the urgent activity around her. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the rifle's report was different somehow, not just another shot in the symphony of precision, but something that carried weight beyond its acoustic signature. Downrange, her bullet found its mark with the kind of accuracy that made experienced spotters look twice at their instruments. Dead center, with a precision that suggested either remarkable luck or skill, far beyond what her equipment should have allowed. The impact was noted, recorded, and filed away as an interesting anomaly in what everyone expected would be a brief and somewhat embarrassing competition debut. But Master Sergeant Lopez, watching from the observation area with growing certainty about what she'd seen in that scope ring, felt something cold settle in her stomach. Because that shot hadn't been luck, and the woman behind that worn rifle wasn't who she appeared to be. In the intelligence files Lopez had read years ago, there were references to a ghost team sniper who'd made impossible shots with equipment that looked exactly like what Sarah Mitchell had brought to this competition. The scored portion of the competition was about to begin, and everyone expected a quick resolution to what had become an entertaining sideshow. What they got instead was about to change everything they thought they knew about precision shooting, military history, and the woman who'd walked onto their range carrying a rifle that had once changed the course of conflicts in places that didn't officially exist. Master Sergeant Rita Lopez excused herself from the observation area with the kind of casual urgency that didn't draw attention but got results. Her mind was racing through classified memories she'd thought buried under years of routine intelligence work. The symbol she'd glimpsed on Sarah's scope ring wasn't just familiar, it was burned into her memory from briefings that had kept her awake for weeks after reading them. She made her way to the Range Control Building's communications room, a small office tucked behind the main registration area, where sensitive calls could be made without civilian oversight. The room smelled of stale coffee and electronic equipment, with banks of radios and secure telephone systems that connected Camp Pendleton to networks most people didn't know existed. Lopez closed the door behind her and activated the privacy protocols that would ensure her conversation remained classified. The number she dialed was memorized but rarely used, connecting her to a duty officer at the Defense Intelligence Agency who specialized in operational personnel tracking. These were the people who kept tabs on assets whose activities couldn't be discussed in normal military channels, whose service records were sealed behind classifications that would never be declassified. "Duty Officer Martinez," came the crisp voice after 2 rings. No unit identification, no pleasantries, just the professional efficiency of someone accustomed to handling sensitive calls. "This is Master Sergeant Lopez, Camp Pendleton West. I need verification on a possible classified asset identification." Lopez kept her voice steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Individual presents with equipment bearing Ghost Team Sierra markings." The silence that followed stretched long enough for Lopez to wonder if the connection had failed. When Martinez spoke again, his tone had shifted to something far more serious. "Ghost Team Sierra was deactivated 15 years ago. All personnel are accounted for, and their current status is classified at levels above your clearance." "Sir, I understand that, but I'm looking at someone who has equipment that bears the unit insignia. Female, mid-40s, competing in the Desert Eagle Challenge under civilian contractor status. The markings are authentic. I've seen them in classified briefings." Another pause, longer this time. Lopez could hear keyboard clicks in the background, the sound of databases being accessed and cross-referenced. "Sergeant Lopez, maintain visual contact with this individual, but take no action. Do not approach. Do not engage in conversation. Do not alert anyone else to your suspicions. We're dispatching a liaison officer who will be there within the hour." "Sir, she's currently competing in a marksmanship competition. If she is who I think she is, then she's exactly where she should be," Martinez cut her off. "Ghost Team Sierra held the record for longest confirmed elimination. If our files are correct, the asset you're observing is responsible for neutralizing high-value targets at distances that redefined what was considered possible in precision shooting." The line went dead with finality that left Lopez staring at the handset. She replaced it carefully, her mind spinning through the implications of what she'd just learned. Ghost Team Sierra hadn't just been an elite sniper unit. They'd been legendary. operating in conflicts that never made the news and eliminating threats that could have destabilized entire regions. Back on the firing line, Sarah had completed her sighting sequence and was waiting for the scored portion of the competition to begin. Around her, other competitors were making final adjustments to their equipment, checking wind conditions one last time, and settling into the mental state required for precision shooting at extreme distances. The nervous energy that had marked the morning was giving way to focused concentration as the reality of the challenge ahead became clear. The targets for the scored round were positioned at 1,200 yards, a distance that separated true marksmen from recreational shooters. At that range, a bullet dropped nearly 20 feet from the bore line and drifted significantly in even, moderate crosswinds. Success required not just accurate shooting, but a deep understanding of external ballistics, environmental conditions, and the subtle interactions between ammunition and atmospheric pressure. Captain Derek Williams took his position at the range control station, his voice carrying across the facility through speakers that ensured every competitor received the same information simultaneously. Competitors, you will have 20 minutes to engage 10 targets. Each target will be scored electronically, and your total score will determine placement in the competition. Wind conditions are currently 12 miles per hour from the southwest, with gusts to 18. Temperature is 94 degrees Fahrenheit, relative humidity 32%. The technical specifications continued, providing environmental data that experienced shooters would use to calculate trajectory adjustments. But Sarah wasn't taking notes or consulting ballistic charts like many of her competitors. Instead, she was reading the environment, directly watching vegetation movement, observing heat wave patterns, feeling wind variations that instruments couldn't measure with the sensitivity that came from years of making shots where failure meant death. Sergeant Jake Parker, positioned 3 spots to Sarah's left, was going through an elaborate preparation ritual that involved multiple ballistic calculators, weather monitoring equipment, and what appeared to be a small tablet computer loaded with atmospheric modeling software. His rifle was a masterpiece of modern engineering, with a stock that adjusted in 6 dimensions and a scope that cost more than most people's cars. "Check out the museum piece," he muttered to his spotter, loud enough for nearby competitors to hear. "She's not even using the calculator. Probably thinks Kentucky windage is a legitimate ballistic correction." His spotter, Corporal Davis, grinned appreciatively. "Maybe she's planning to throw the bullets by hand. Might be more accurate than that antique she's carrying." Their conversation drew chuckles from other competitors who were close enough to overhear. The tension of high-level competition often found release in humor, and Sarah's equipment provided an easy target for stress relief. What none of them understood was that the rifle they were mocking had achieved precision under conditions they'd never face, against targets that shot back. The electronic scoring system chirped to life, indicating that targets were active and ready for engagement. Across the range, spotting scopes were adjusted for optimal viewing, shooting positions refined for maximum stability and breathing, patterns regulated for the kind of physiological control that precision shooting demanded at the highest levels. "Competitors ready," came the range command. "You may commence firing when ready." The firing line erupted in carefully controlled violence as precision rifles spoke with authority that echoed across the desert. Each shot was the culmination of extensive preparation, representing hundreds of hours of practice and thousands of dollars in equipment optimization. The electronic scoring system registered impacts with digital precision, updating scores in real time and displaying results that would determine national team selections. Parker fired first in their immediate area, his rifle producing the sharp crack of a carefully developed handload optimized for accuracy and consistency. Through the spotting scope, his impact was visible as a clean hole punched through the target's center ring. The electronic system registered a score of 10, the maximum possible points for that target. His spotter called wind corrections for the next shot, their communication a practiced routine developed through months of partnership. Other competitors were achieving similar results, their equipment and training combining to produce the kind of accuracy that defined elite-level marksmanship. Groups that measured in fractions of inches at distances where most people couldn't distinguish individual targets. The sound of precision rifles created a symphony of controlled destruction, each shot representing the intersection of human skill and technological capability. Sarah took her time, reading environmental conditions with patience that seemed almost meditative compared to the urgent precision surrounding her. When she finally settled behind her rifle, the worn stock fitted against her shoulder like custom tailoring despite its humble appearance. Through her scope, the distant target resolved with clarity that transformed it from an abstract challenge into a clearly defined objective. Her breathing settled into the rhythm that marked true professionals' slow, controlled, with the natural respiratory pause that provided the stable platform required for precision shooting. The trigger broke cleanly under her finger, the rifle's recoil managed with technique that kept the scope's reticle on target through the entire firing sequence. Downrange, her bullet found its mark with authority that made the electronic scoring system register maximum points. But it wasn't just the score that caught attention. It was the effortless precision with which she'd achieved it, using equipment that should have made such accuracy impossible at this distance and under these conditions. Parker noticed the impact through his peripheral vision and turned to look at Sarah's target with curiosity that quickly shifted disbelief. Dead center, scored as a perfect 10, achieved with equipment that belonged in a museum rather than a precision shooting competition. His own shot, fired with equipment worth 10 times as much, hadn't been more accurate. Lucky shot, he told his spotter, but his voice carried uncertainty that hadn't been there moments before. Sarah's second shot followed the first with mechanical precision, her routine unchanged by the perfect result of her initial engagement. Same breathing pattern, same sight picture, same trigger control that spoke of muscle memory developed through repetitive practice under conditions that demanded perfection. The bullet's impact was measured electronically as another maximum score, placed with precision that eliminated any possibility of luck. By her third shot, conversations around the firing line had shifted. Competitors who'd been focused entirely on their own performance were beginning to notice the consistent precision coming from position 14. The electronic scoring display showed Sarah tied for the lead despite equipment that should have relegated her to last place, and the implications were starting to register with people who understood the technical requirements of precision shooting. Master Sergeant Lopez watched from the observation area with growing certainty about Sarah's identity. The shooting performance wasn't just excellent, it was characteristic of someone whose training had emphasized precision under combat conditions rather than competition perfection. Each shot was fired with the same calm efficiency, as if the target's distance and the competition's pressure were irrelevant variables in an equation she'd solved long ago. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted text message that contained coordinates for a meeting location and instructions to maintain surveillance without interference. The liaison officer was en route, but until he arrived, Lopez was responsible for ensuring that nothing disrupted what was becoming an increasingly significant situation. The competition continued with mechanical precision, but the atmosphere on the range had shifted. Conversations were more subdued, and several competitors were openly watching Sarah's performance with expressions that ranged from curiosity to concern. The electronic scoring system continued registering perfect impacts from position 14, creating a statistical anomaly that challenged everything the other shooters thought they knew about equipment requirements for precision shooting. Parker's concentration began suffering as he repeatedly glanced toward Sarah's position. His own shooting remained excellent by any reasonable standard, but the consistent perfection coming from the worn rifle was affecting his mental game in ways that years of competitive experience hadn't prepared him for. His fourth shot, influenced by distraction, scored a 9 instead of his usual 10. "Focus on your own lane," his spotter advised, recognizing the signs of competitive pressure affecting performance. "Equipment doesn't shoot itself, she's just having a good day." But Davis's words carried uncertainty that contradicted their surface meaning. Because what they were witnessing wasn't just a good day, it was a demonstration of capability that transcended normal explanations and suggested expertise, developed through experiences none of them could imagine. Sarah's shooting routine remained unchanged throughout the scored sequence. Each shot was approached with the same methodical precision, fired with the same controlled technique, and achieved results that maintained her perfect score through increasingly challenging conditions. Wind gusts that caused other competitors to miss their intended point of impact seemed irrelevant to her performance, as if she was reading atmospheric conditions with sensitivity that electronic instruments couldn't match. The seventh target proved especially challenging for most competitors, positioned at a distance that required maximum elevation adjustment and precise wind compensation. Several shooters who'd been maintaining excellent scores finally succumbed to the environmental challenges, their impacts dropping into lower scoring rings as bullets drifted in wind patterns that defied prediction. Sarah's approach to the difficult target showed no variation from her previous engagements. Same preparation time, same shooting position, same trigger control that had characterized her entire performance. When her bullet impacted dead center for another maximum score, the range fell noticeably quieter as other competitors realized they were witnessing something beyond normal competitive excellence. By the ninth target, Parker had abandoned any pretense of focusing solely on his own performance. His shooting had deteriorated to the point where his spotter was openly concerned about their team standing. But Parker couldn't stop watching the woman whose impossible equipment was producing impossible results. His pride, built on years of competitive success and expensive equipment optimization, was crumbling under the weight of witnessing someone achieve superior results with a rifle that should have been retired decades ago. The final target of the sequence represented the ultimate challenge positioned at maximum distance, with wind conditions that had grown increasingly unstable as the desert heated under the climbing sun. Electronic wind meters showed gusts varying by more than 10 miles per hour, creating atmospheric chaos that would challenge even the most sophisticated ballistic calculation systems. Most competitors approached this final shot with visible tension, understanding that a single mistake could drop them from contention despite excellent performance throughout the earlier sequence. Equipment that had performed flawlessly under stable conditions now faced the ultimate test of precision shooting, maintaining accuracy when environmental variables exceeded the limits of predictable compensation. Sarah's preparation for the final shot showed the same calm methodology that had characterized her entire performance. No additional equipment consultation, no hurried ballistic calculations, no signs of the pressure that was clearly affecting other competitors. She simply read the conditions with sensitivity developed through experience, settled into her shooting position with practiced efficiency, and engaged the target with the same controlled precision that had marked every previous shot. Her final bullet's impact registered as another perfect score, completing a performance that defied explanation and challenged every assumption about equipment requirements for precision shooting. 10 shots, 10 perfect impacts, achieved with equipment that looked like it belonged in a historical display rather than a modern competition. The range fell silent as scores were tallied and results displayed. Sarah Mitchell had achieved a perfect score, tying for first place in a competition where equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars had failed to produce superior results. But more than the numbers, it was the effortless consistency of her performance that left experienced competitors struggling to understand what they'd witnessed. As competitors began clearing their equipment and discussing the day's results, Lopez received another encrypted message with updated instructions. The liaison officer had arrived and was requesting an immediate briefing on Sarah's performance and current status. What had begun as routine competition oversight was evolving into something far more significant, with implications that extended well beyond marksmanship scores and national team selections. Parker approached the scoring station with disbelief written across his face, staring at electronic displays that showed his expensive equipment and years of training had been matched by a rifle that should have been retired before he was born. His worldview, built on the assumption that superior equipment produced superior results, was cracking under the weight of empirical evidence that contradicted everything he believed about precision shooting. Sarah packed her equipment with the same methodical precision she'd shown throughout the day, seemingly unaware that her performance had shattered assumptions and raised questions that couldn't be answered through normal competitive channels. Her rifle went back into its humble case, her ammunition was stored with practiced efficiency, and her demeanor remained unchanged despite achieving something that would be discussed in marksmanship circles for years to come. But Master Sergeant Lopez knew this was just the beginning, because the woman packing that worn rifle wasn't just an exceptional shooter. She was a legend whose official existence had been erased, whose achievements were classified at levels that most military personnel would never access, and whose presence at this competition represented something far more significant than recreational marksmanship. The liaison officer was waiting in the parking area, and the conversation about to unfold would change everything about how this day was remembered. Because Sarah Mitchell hadn't just won a shooting competition, she'd revealed herself as one of the most lethal precision shooters in military history, carrying equipment that bore the scars of conflicts that officially never happened, and skills developed through experiences that couldn't be discussed in normal military channels. The liaison officer didn't look like someone who dealt in classified operations. Agent Thomas Chen appeared to be just another civilian contractor in khakis and a polo shirt, the kind of person who might work in base logistics or equipment procurement. But Master Sergeant Lopez recognized the careful way he moved, the subtle bulge of concealed body armor beneath his casual clothing, and the eyes that missed nothing while appearing to focus on everything except what really mattered. They met in the parking lot between a row of civilian vehicles, close enough to the range complex to maintain visual contact with Sarah Mitchell, but far enough away to avoid casual observation. Chun's sedan looked like standard government issue until you noticed the reinforced frame, run-flat tires, and antenna array that suggested communications capabilities far beyond normal civilian requirements. "Sergeant Lopez," Chun said without offering his hand or any other form of greeting. "Briefing indicates you've identified a possible Ghost Team Sierra asset. Walk me through your observations." Lopez glanced back toward the range where Sarah was still methodically packing her equipment, seemingly oblivious to the attention her performance had generated. "Equipment bears unit markings that I recognized from classified intelligence briefings. Symbol was partially concealed but visible during routine inspection. Individual demonstrated shooting capabilities consistent with advanced sniper training." Chun's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted slightly in a way that suggested the information had his complete attention. "Describe the performance." "Perfect score in precision competition using equipment that should have been incapable of achieving those results. 10 shots at 1,200 yards, maximum points on each engagement, performed under environmental conditions that challenged competitors using equipment worth 20 times as much." Chun nodded slowly, his eyes moving to observe Sarah's position while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. Ghost Team Sierra was officially disbanded 15 years ago following Operation Desert Mirage. All personnel were reassigned to classified positions or retired with modified service records. The individual you've identified shouldn't exist in any database accessible through normal channels. The weight of those words settled between them like a physical presence. Lopez had suspected she was dealing with someone whose service record contained information beyond her clearance level. But Chun's confirmation made the situation far more significant than she'd initially understood. "What are my instructions regarding the subject?" Lopez asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral despite the implications racing through her mind. "Maintain normal operational procedures. If questioned, you observe nothing unusual about the competitor or her equipment." This conversation never happened. Chun paused, watching Sarah close her rifle case with movements that spoke of long practice under conditions where speed and efficiency could mean survival. "If Sergeant First Class Mitchell contacts you directly or requests assistance, provide full support and inform me immediately through the secure channel we've already discussed." Chun's formal use of Sarah's rank and last name confirmed what Lopez had begun to suspect. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or mere similarity in gear. The woman competing in the marksmanship event was exactly who Lopez believed she was, carrying equipment marked by battles that had never made it into official records. As they watched, Sarah finished checking her gear and began walking toward the parking lot. Her pace was calm but deliberate, the measured walk of someone who knew that appearing relaxed while staying alert was a survival skill. She gave courteous nods to other competitors, but avoided the usual post-match breakdowns that often followed high-level shooting events. Chun slipped away with the ease of someone trained in surveillance. One moment he was beside Lopez, discussing classified personnel. The next he was blending in with the base traffic, heading to his car like any other contractor ending a routine day. His exit left Lopez with a burden heavier than her usual intelligence work. Back at the range, the competition had sparked discussions that would linger far beyond the final scores. Competitors grouped together, analyzing gear and environmental factors with the kind of precision that marks experienced shooters. But beneath these technical debates was a shared disbelief about Sarah's performance, specifically how she managed such results with equipment that looked visibly outdated. Captain Derek Williams found himself facing uncomfortable questions. As the range commander, he had to confirm the legitimacy of the competition results and ensure every shooter had operated under the same conditions. The electronic scoring data clearly supported what had happened. Sarah had hit all 10 targets with perfect scores. Yet Williams struggled to reconcile that with what he knew about modern shooting tech. "Sir," said Sergeant Jake Parker, approaching with the respectful tone of someone questioning something beyond their understanding, "can I ask about the results for position 14? The scores don't match what that rifle should be capable of." Williams checked his tablet, reviewing the confirmed data. The scoring system verified 10 perfect hits. All shots were fired under the same conditions as everyone else. Environmental data checks out. Parker tried to process what he was hearing. His own performance had been excellent, 8 perfect shots and 2 near misses. But Sarah's flawless round with clearly inferior equipment challenged everything he believed about shooting. "Sir, that rifle shouldn't be able to produce that kind of accuracy. The barrel alone should cause enough spread to make those scores impossible." Williams understood the confusion. Today's precision rifles use advanced designs, carefully tuned barrel harmonics, stocks built to minimize shooter error, and high-tech triggers. Yet here was Sarah, outperforming everyone with what looked like gear from a different era. "Sergeant Parker, the system doesn't grade the equipment. It records the results. And whatever she knows about shooting, she applied it effectively." Still, even as he spoke, Williams couldn't shake the unease. What they'd seen wasn't just unusual, it hinted at a level of experience few competitive shooters would ever gain. Elsewhere, similar discussions were unfolding. Specialist Marcus Webb argued that competitions needed tighter equipment standards to prevent this kind of outlier performance. "This isn't about the shooter," he said to a group by the gear inspection area. "It's about fairness. Competitions should reflect skill, not luck. You just can't shoot like that without the right tools. It defies physics. Listening nearby, Master Sergeant Lopez recognized just how complicated this situation was becoming. The competitors were grappling with cognitive dissonance. Their beliefs about shooting were clashing with evidence that didn't fit. Emotions ranged from denial to frustration to a reluctant admiration none of them were ready to admit. Meanwhile, Sarah had reached her truck and began packing up with the same deliberate care she'd shown during the event. Her actions were precise and efficient, shaped by years of practice in preparing to leave potentially dangerous areas. A young private approached her with nervous energy. Private Lisa Chun, new to the competitive scene but experienced enough to recognize skill, wanted to ask a question she wasn't sure she should. "Ma'am," she began hesitantly, "I was wondering about your shooting technique. I've never seen results like that from that kind of gear." Sarah looked up, her eyes reflecting deep experience. Her expression was kind but reserved. Look of someone used to avoiding questions that probed too far into her past. "Your gear doesn't decide the outcome," she said quietly. "If you really understand your rifle and use it consistently, that's worth more than the most advanced equipment." Chun nodded, eager to absorb any wisdom Sarah was willing to share, sensing she was learning from someone who operated far beyond normal standards. But the calculations for environmental corrections, the ballistic software that most competitors use, how do you compensate for atmospheric variables without electronic assistance? Sarah's hands paused in their packing routine, and for a moment her expression carried the distant look of someone remembering experiences that couldn't be shared with people who hadn't lived them. Electronic systems provide data, but understanding comes from experience. You learn to read conditions directly by spending time in environments where miscalculation has consequences beyond lost points. The implications of her words settled over Chun like cold water. The woman standing beside this weathered truck wasn't just an exceptional competitive shooter. She was someone who'd developed her skills under conditions where accuracy meant survival rather than scoring. "Ma'am, were you active duty? Your technique suggests advanced training beyond what most civilians receive." Sarah closed her equipment case with finality that suggested the conversation was approaching boundaries she preferred not to cross. "I served my time and learned what I needed to learn. Now I use those skills in ways that don't require wearing a uniform." But Chun's persistence reflected the curiosity of someone genuinely interested in improving her own capabilities rather than satisfying casual interest. "The consistency of your performance today was remarkable. Is there specific training that develops that kind of repeatability under pressure?" For the first time since the conversation began, Sarah's expression softened slightly. The young private's questions reflected genuine desire to learn rather than idle curiosity. And Sarah recognized the difference with sensitivity developed through years of distinguishing between people who asked questions for different reasons. "Consistency comes from understanding that every shot is the same shot," Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "Distance changes, wind changes, temperature changes, but the fundamentals remain constant. You develop repeatability by practicing those fundamentals until they become automatic, regardless of external conditions." Chun absorbed this information with the intensity of someone recognizing instruction from a master practitioner. Her own competitive experience had taught her the importance of consistency, but Sarah's performance had demonstrated a level of repeatability that transcended normal training outcomes. The pressure of competition affects most shooters' performance. You seemed completely unaffected by the environment or the other competitors' presence. How do you maintain that kind of mental state? Sarah's answer came with the measured cadence of someone who'd thought deeply about subjects that most people never considered. Pressure is a choice. You can let external circumstances affect your performance, or you can focus on controlling what you can control and accepting what you can't. Competition pressure is insignificant compared to situations where failure costs lives rather than points. The weight of that statement hung between them like revelation. Chun was beginning to understand that the woman she was speaking with had developed her skills under conditions that made competitive shooting seem like recreational activity rather than serious challenge. "Ma'am, I appreciate your time and the insights you've shared. Your performance today challenged everything I thought I knew about equipment requirements for precision shooting." Sarah nodded with the kind of acknowledgement that recognized honest appreciation without encouraging further inquiry into subjects that couldn't be discussed. Equipment is a tool. Understanding the tool's capabilities and your own limitations produces better results than having expensive tools you don't fully understand. As Chun walked away, Sarah finished loading her truck with movements that remained precise despite the emotional weight of conversations that had touched on memories she preferred to keep buried. Her participation in the competition had been intended as a simple demonstration of ongoing capabilities, not as an invitation to discuss experiences that remained classified 15 years after their occurrence. But across the parking area, Agent Chun was observing her interaction with the young private through surveillance, equipment that captured both audio and visual information with clarity that would be analyzed later by people whose job involved understanding the significance of casual conversations between classified personnel and active duty military members. The competition's official results were being compiled and distributed, documenting Sarah's perfect performance alongside detailed environmental data that would be studied by marksmanship instructors trying to understand how such results had been achieved under challenging conditions. Her name would appear on official records as the civilian contractor who'd tied for first place in the Desert Eagle Challenge, but those records wouldn't include information about the equipment she'd used or the reactions her performance had generated. Williams completed his post-competition administrative duties with efficiency that masked his continuing confusion about results that challenged his understanding of marksmanship fundamentals. The scoring data was indisputable, the environmental monitoring was comprehensive, and the electronic verification systems had functioned flawlessly throughout the event. Yet he remained troubled by performance that seemed to transcend normal explanations. As competitors departed and range personnel secured equipment for the day, the conversations continued with intensity that marked significant events in competitive shooting circles. Sarah's performance would be discussed in marksmanship forums, analyzed in training seminars, and remembered as the day when assumptions about equipment requirements were challenged by someone whose capabilities transcended normal competitive standards. But the most significant conversations were happening through encrypted communications between people whose job involved tracking personnel whose official existence had been modified for national security purposes. Because Sarah Mitchell's perfect performance hadn't just won a shooting competition, it had confirmed the continued operational readiness of an asset whose skills had been developed through experiences that remained classified at the highest levels of military intelligence. The desert sun continued its relentless climb toward noon, painting everything in shades of brass and shadow that made the heat shimmer off asphalt like liquid metal. Sarah's truck pulled away from Camp Pendleton West carrying equipment that had once changed the course of conflicts in places that didn't appear on official maps, operated by someone whose service record contained information that most people would never be cleared to access. Behind her, the range complex settled into post-competition routine, but the conversations generated by her performance would continue long after the desert heat had faded into evening cool, because they'd witnessed something that challenged fundamental assumptions about precision shooting, demonstrated by someone whose true identity was protected by classifications that ensured her achievements would remain officially unacknowledged despite their extraordinary nature. Colonel Amanda Hayes strode across the range complex with the kind of purposeful momentum that made people step aside without conscious thought. Her approach toward the parking area wasn't casual, it was the measured advance of someone who'd received information that required immediate personal attention. The base commander's presence at what should have been routine competition cleanup meant something significant had developed, and every military member within sight recognized the shift in atmospheric pressure that accompanied command-level intervention. Sarah was securing the last of her equipment when she noticed the colonel's approach in her peripheral vision. Years of surviving in environments where inattention could be fatal had developed situational awareness that functioned like an early warning system, and Colonel Hayes's purposeful stride triggered recognition that this wasn't casual post-competition interaction. Hayes stopped 6 feet from Sarah's truck, her posture carrying the kind of authority that didn't require verbal announcement. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through close-cropped hair and the bearing of someone who'd made decisions under fire that most people couldn't imagine. Her uniform was crisp but lived in, with ribbons that told stories of deployments to places that required courage rather than just competence. "Ms. Mitchell," Hayes said, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard clearly without broadcasting their conversation to casual observers. "Outstanding performance today. That kind of precision shooting represents capabilities that don't develop through recreational practice." Sarah straightened slowly, recognizing the weight behind words that sounded like compliments but carried implications that went far deeper than competitive acknowledgement. Her hands remained visible and relaxed, the body language of someone who understood that unexpected contact from senior military officials required careful navigation. "Thank you, Colonel. The range facilities here are excellent, and the competition was well organized. Captain Williams runs a professional operation." Hayes nodded with appreciation for responses that acknowledged the compliment without revealing information that shouldn't be shared with people whose clearance levels didn't extend to classified personnel records. "Your equipment is interesting. That scope configuration isn't something you see in civilian competitions very often." The statement hung between them like a question that hadn't been directly asked. Sarah's scope, with its worn exterior and carefully concealed markings, represented technology that had been state-of-the-art 15 years ago when Ghost Team Sierra was conducting operations in regions that officially didn't exist. The electrical tape concealing unit insignia wasn't just makeshift repair. It was operational security protocol for personnel whose equipment couldn't be traced through normal military supply channels. "It's served me well over the years," Sarah replied with the kind of neutral response that provided acknowledgement without elaboration. Sometimes older equipment performs better than people expect when it's properly maintained and understood. Hayes studied Sarah's face with the intensity of someone reading between lines for information that couldn't be stated directly. The Colonel's intelligence briefings had included references to Ghost Team Sierra personnel, but those files contained more questions than answers about individuals whose service records had been modified for national security purposes. "Ms. Mitchell, would you mind walking with me? I'd like to discuss some opportunities that might interest someone with your particular skill set." The invitation wasn't really optional, delivered with the kind of polite authority that made refusal awkward without being technically impossible. Sarah recognized the dynamic and responded with the same professional courtesy that had characterized her interactions throughout the day. "Of course, Colonel. I have a few minutes before I need to head back to Barstow." They walked toward the range complex's administrative area, their conversation taking place in full view of anyone who might be observing, but far enough from other personnel to prevent casual eavesdropping. Hayes set a pace that suggested serious discussion rather than recreational stroll, and her demeanor indicated that what she had to say required privacy that couldn't be guaranteed in more public settings. "Your performance today demonstrates capabilities that suggest advanced training," Hayes began, choosing words that could be interpreted as recruitment conversation while containing deeper meanings for someone who understood the subtext. "The Kind of precision you displayed typically requires extensive practice under conditions that most civilian shooters never experience. Sarah's response came with measured consideration that acknowledged the colonel's implications without confirming. Details that remained classified. I've had opportunities to develop my skills in environments that required precision under challenging conditions. Those experiences tend to translate well to competitive situations. Hayes appreciated the careful phrasing that provided acknowledgement, without specifics that could be problematic if overheard by unauthorized personnel. The conversation was developing according to protocols, designed for contact between classified personnel and military officials who needed to verify capabilities without discussing details that remained protected by security classifications. The military is always interested in individuals whose capabilities exceed normal parameters. Hayes continued, her voice carrying implications that extended beyond typical recruitment discussions, especially when those capabilities have been demonstrated under conditions that prove reliability rather than just recreational competence. They paused near the range observation area, where the afternoon heat was beginning to build toward the desert's daily climax. Heat waves shimmered off concrete surfaces, creating atmospheric distortions that made precise shooting even more challenging than the morning's conditions had been. The flag hanging from the facility's main pole moved with wind patterns that told stories about atmospheric conditions, and experienced shooters could read those patterns like text that revealed environmental variables. "Colonel, I appreciate the interest, but I'm content with my current situation," Sarah replied with the kind of respectful declination that left doors open while establishing boundaries. "My service obligations have been fulfilled, and I prefer civilian pursuits that don't require wearing a uniform." Hayes nodded with understanding that went beyond surface interpretation of Sarah's words. Personnel whose service records contained classified information often preferred civilian status that provided distance from military structures while maintaining access to skills developed through experiences that couldn't be discussed in normal contexts. "I understand completely," Hayes said, her tone carrying respect for choices that reflected complex considerations most people never faced. "However, there are situations where civilian contractors provide capabilities that active duty personnel can't deliver as effectively. Consulting arrangements that respect your preference for independence while utilizing expertise that shouldn't be wasted." The offer had been carefully framed, broad enough to avoid firm commitments, but clearly aimed at someone with Sarah's unique background. Military consulting was a common path for retired personnel whose skills were still in demand, offering compensation that often included perks to offset the limits imposed by classified work. Sarah took her time considering the proposal. She approached it with the thoughtful caution of someone who knew that even simple-sounding opportunities could come with hidden implications. As a civilian, she had freedom from military obligations, but she'd also lost access to the resources and support systems that came with active service. "What kind of consulting would this involve?" she asked, her tone showing genuine interest rather than polite dismissal. Colonel Hayes glanced around to make sure no one was listening before answering with a level of detail that confirmed how serious the offer was. "Developing training programs for precision shooting. Based on what you showed today, your understanding of the fundamentals could seriously improve our instruction. It pays well, respects your civilian status, and directly contributes to national defense." The proposal made sense. Sarah's flawless performance, especially with outdated gear, proved she had skills that could benefit formal training programs. Her civilian status would actually work in her favor, offering authenticity that came from volunteering rather than being assigned. "Training development sounds interesting," Sarah said, clearly intrigued by the possibility of applying her skills in a meaningful way while keeping her independence. "What's the timeline? Where would the instruction be held?" Hayes smiled, recognizing that she was seriously considering the offer. We're working on a new precision curriculum that prioritizes core fundamentals over expensive gear. Your ability to get those results with standard issue equipment could shift how we train future marksmen. Their conversation was starting to draw subtle attention from people on the range, those who understood this was no casual chat. From her position at range control, Master Sergeant Lopez could tell this was more than routine recruiting. It was the kind of conversation that hinted at deeper implications. "I'd be open to discussing specifics," Sarah said. Her tone made it clear this wasn't just small talk. She was seriously evaluating the opportunity. "Consulting fits my current schedule better than competition circuits, and training appeals to me more anyway." Hayes nodded, clearly pleased. "I'll have my staff put together a formal proposal with details on scope and compensation. We'll use the contact info from your competition registration to follow up." Just then, Captain Williams approached, with a sense of urgency that made it clear something needed attention. His expression showed that the situation wasn't something that could wait. "Colonel Hayes, sorry to interrupt, but we have an issue that needs your immediate attention," he said, his tone tight with tension. Hayes turned to him with the full focus of a senior officer. "What's going on, Captain?" Williams glanced at Sarah, clearly unsure how much he could say in front of her. "Ma'am, it's about the competition specifically. Concerns regarding equipment verification and procedures for civilian participants." The carefully worded statement masked the real issue. Competitors were complaining about Sarah's performance without directly accusing her in her presence. Hayes understood the delicate nature of addressing complaints that questioned competition fairness without disrespecting a standout participant. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you again for your time," Hayes said, signaling the end of the conversation while keeping the door open for further contact. "Expect a proposal from us by next week. I look forward to continuing this." Sarah accepted the wrap-up with understanding. In military settings, sensitive matters were often discussed away from civilian ears. Her departure would give Hayes space to handle the complaints without added diplomatic complexity. "Thank you for the opportunity, Colonel. I'll look forward to reviewing the details," Sarah replied. As she walked back to her truck, she could already hear murmurs beginning conversations centered on her performance and the outdated equipment that had defied everyone's expectations. Her exit gave Hayes the room to address the concerns more directly. Behind her, Captain Williams explained that multiple competitors had formally asked for a review of the rules, arguing that Sarah's equipment didn't meet the standards expected for such competitions. Their argument was rooted in fairness. They believed that allowing outdated gear distorted the purpose of the event, which was to determine the best marksman using appropriate tools. Hayes listened with the calm patience of a leader used to managing valid concerns. But she also knew that Sarah had proven something important. Skill can overcome technology. And that truth often provokes resistance from those whose assumptions are challenged. "Captain Williams, the competition rules set safety standards, not performance ones," Hayes replied firmly. "Any equipment that passes inspection and functions properly is allowed, no matter how old or basic it is." Williams nodded, accepting the directive, though clearly still uneasy. He understood Hayes's position, but struggled with the idea that outdated gear could produce results that threw standard competitive logic into question. "Understood, ma'am. But some feel it gives an unfair advantage when someone gets unexpected results from equipment that shouldn't perform at that level." Hayes appreciated Williams's diplomatic phrasing of complaints that essentially accused Sarah of achieving impossible results through methods that couldn't be explained through normal analysis. Such concerns reflected cognitive dissonance that occurred when empirical evidence contradicted fundamental assumptions about cause and effect relationships in precision shooting. "Captain, our responsibility is ensuring fair competition under established rules, not validating competitors' assumptions about equipment requirements," Hayes stated with finality that closed discussion while establishing policy for future reference. Ms. Mitchell's performance demonstrates that skill can compensate for equipment limitations, which should inspire rather than discourage serious marksmen. The conversation continued with administrative details about future competitions and equipment standards that would prevent similar controversies while maintaining fairness for all participants. But the underlying tension focused on Sarah's demonstration that expertise could transcend technological limitations, challenging beliefs that most competitors had never questioned, until witnessing empirical evidence that contradicted their assumptions. Meanwhile, Sarah's truck was pulling away from Camp Pendleton West, carrying equipment that had once operated in conflicts that officially never happened. Her participation in the Desert Eagle Challenge had been intended as simple demonstration of ongoing capabilities, but it had evolved into something far more significant: confirmation that classified personnel retained operational readiness years after their official service had ended. The afternoon heat continued building toward its daily peak, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold that made everything shimmer with intensity that challenged both equipment and personnel. But somewhere in the administrative offices of Camp Pendleton West, secure communications were being transmitted to people whose job involved tracking individuals whose capabilities remained relevant to national security interests despite their civilian status. Because Sarah Mitchell's perfect performance hadn't just won a shooting competition, it had demonstrated that Ghost Team Sierra personnel retained the skills that had made them legendary, using equipment that bore the scars of conflicts that remained classified 15 years after their occurrence. And that demonstration had implications that extended far beyond marksmanship scores and competitive standings. 3 weeks after the Desert Eagle Challenge, Sarah Mitchell stood in the doorway of her gun shop in Barstow, watching the desert sunrise paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. The morning air carried the crisp coolness that would soon give way to another day of relentless heat, but for now, the world held that perfect stillness that made the high desert feel like sanctuary rather than exile. The bell above her door chimed as Private Lisa Chun stepped inside, carrying a rifle case and wearing the kind of nervous determination that marked someone about to step outside their comfort zone. The young soldier had driven 3 hours from Camp Pendleton to ask questions that had been burning in her mind since witnessing Sarah's impossible performance with equipment that shouldn't have produced such results. "Ma'am, I hope you don't mind me coming by," Chun began, her voice carrying respectful uncertainty. "I've been thinking about our conversation after the competition, and I was hoping you might have time to answer some questions about precision shooting fundamentals." Sarah smiled with genuine warmth, recognizing the hunger for knowledge that drove serious shooters to seek instruction from people whose capabilities transcended normal parameters. Her shop was filled with rifles that ranged from basic hunting weapons to precision instruments that cost more than most cars. But Chun's interest focused on understanding rather than equipment acquisition. "I have time," Sarah replied, gesturing toward the back room where she kept a small indoor range for equipment testing and basic instruction. "What specific aspects of precision shooting are you trying to understand better?" Chun's questions revealed depth of thought that impressed Sarah with their focus on fundamental principles rather than superficial techniques. The young soldier wanted to understand how environmental reading translated into accurate trajectory prediction, how breathing patterns affected shot consistency, and how mental preparation influenced performance under pressure. "Ma'am, your shooting at the competition seemed effortless, like you were reading conditions that the rest of us couldn't see," Chun explained, her words reflecting genuine curiosity rather than idle flattery. "Electronic instruments provide data, but you seem to be working with information that went beyond what measuring devices could supply." Sarah nodded with appreciation for observations that demonstrated real understanding of the complexities involved in precision shooting at extended distances. Electronic systems measure specific variables, but atmospheric conditions involve interactions between multiple factors that change constantly. Experience teaches you to recognize patterns that instruments can't detect because they're measuring individual components rather than the complete system. She led Chun to the indoor range, where targets were positioned at distances that allowed demonstration of fundamental principles without requiring the elaborate setup needed for long-range precision work. The facility was modest compared to military installations, but it provided controlled conditions for instruction that focused on basics rather than advanced techniques. Environmental reading develops through practice in varied conditions. Sarah continued, retrieving her competition rifle from its case with movements that remained precise despite the informal setting. You learn to feel atmospheric pressure changes, recognize wind pattern variations that measuring devices miss, and understand how temperature gradients affect bullet flight paths. Chun watched intently as Sarah demonstrated shooting positions that maximize stability while maintaining comfort during extended firing sequences. Her technique emphasized natural body alignment rather than artificial support systems, creating stability that came from understanding biomechanics rather than depending on equipment solutions. The key is developing consistency that functions regardless of external conditions, Sarah explained, settling into a shooting position that looked effortless, but demonstrated years of practice in optimizing human performance variables. Equipment can help, but understanding your own capabilities and limitations produces better results than having expensive tools you don't fully comprehend. They spent the morning working through exercises that built fundamental skills incrementally, each lesson building on previous concepts to create comprehensive understanding rather than isolated techniques. Sarah's instruction emphasized principles that remained constant regardless of equipment variations, environmental conditions, or competitive pressure. Chun's improvement was rapid and obvious, her shots grouping more consistently as she learned to apply concepts that had been theoretical until demonstrated through practical application. Sarah's teaching style combined technical explanation with hands-on practice, creating learning experiences that produced understanding rather than just temporary skill improvement. "Man, this instruction is invaluable," Chun said during a break in their training session. "Your approach to teaching fundamentals makes concepts clear that seemed impossible to understand through normal instruction methods." Sarah appreciated the feedback while recognizing that Chun's rapid progress reflected natural ability combined with serious dedication to improvement. The young soldier possessed the kind of intellectual curiosity and physical coordination that marked individuals capable of achieving excellence in precision shooting with proper instruction and sufficient practice. Understanding develops through practice under varied conditions, Sarah replied, acknowledging Chun's progress while emphasizing the work required to achieve consistent performance. "The concepts we've covered today will serve you well, but mastery requires application in situations that test your ability to maintain performance when conditions become challenging." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Hayes, who entered the shop with the kind of purposeful energy that marked official business conducted in unofficial settings. Her presence in civilian clothing at a private business suggested that whatever brought her to Barstow required discretion that couldn't be maintained through normal military channels. "Ms. Mitchell," Hayes said, nodding acknowledgement to Chun. Before focusing attention on Sarah, "I have the consulting proposal we discussed, along with some additional opportunities that might interest someone with your particular expertise." Sarah gestured toward her office, understanding that Hayes's visit involved discussions that required privacy beyond what the main shop area could provide. Chun excused herself to continue practicing the techniques they'd covered, giving the two women space for conversations that clearly involved matters beyond casual business discussions. Hayes spread documents across Sarah's desk with systematic organization that revealed detailed planning rather than casual offers. The consulting proposals outlined training development opportunities that would utilize Sarah's capabilities while respecting her civilian status and preference for independence from military structure. The Precision Marksmanship Curriculum we discussed has been approved for development, Hayes began, her tone indicating serious commitment to projects that would require significant time and expertise. Your demonstration at the competition convinced leadership that current training methods need revision to emphasize fundamentals over equipment dependency. The financial terms were generous enough to ensure Sarah's full attention while acknowledging the value of expertise that couldn't be acquired through normal training channels. But more than compensation, the proposals offered opportunities to influence how precision shooting would be taught to future generations of military marksmen. There's also interest in having you evaluate current sniper training protocols. Hayes continued, watching Sarah's reaction to offers that went beyond simple instruction assignments. Your background provides perspective that active duty personnel can't offer because their experience operates within current doctrinal limitations. Sarah studied the documents with careful attention to details that would determine whether these opportunities aligned with her post-military objectives. The consulting work offered intellectual challenges that appealed to her need for meaningful activity, while providing income that would support her preferred lifestyle. "Colonel, these proposals interest me," Sarah acknowledged, her words indicating genuine consideration rather than polite deflection. The training development work particularly appeals because it addresses problems I've observed in how precision shooting principles are currently taught. Hayes smiled with satisfaction that marked successful recruitment of someone whose capabilities exceeded normal parameters. Your approach to achieving results through fundamental understanding rather than equipment optimization could transform how we develop marksmen. The kind of transformation that improves national defense capabilities while reducing training costs. They discussed implementation details that would allow Sarah to contribute her expertise while maintaining the civilian independence she valued. The arrangements provided flexibility that accommodated her preferences, while ensuring military training programs would benefit from knowledge gained through experiences that remained classified, but whose lessons could be applied to unclassified instruction. "There's one additional opportunity that requires special consideration," Hayes said, her tone shifting to indicate information that carried security implications beyond normal consulting arrangements. "Intelligence services occasionally need civilian contractors whose capabilities extend beyond current active duty personnel limitations." The offer was carefully phrased to avoid specifics that couldn't be discussed without security clearances. But Sarah understood the implications of consulting work that would utilize skills developed during her classified service with Ghost Team Sierra. Such arrangements would provide occasional assignments that challenged her abilities while contributing to operations that remained essential to national security. What kind of timeline would be involved for these different consulting opportunities? Sarah asked, her questions indicating serious interest in work that would utilize her capabilities while maintaining her chosen civilian status. Hayes outlined scheduling flexibility that would allow Sarah to accept assignments based on her availability and interest rather than military necessity. The arrangements acknowledged that civilian contractors provided their best work when they chose to participate rather than being obligated to serve. As their meeting concluded, Chun returned from her practice session with obvious improvement in her shooting performance and enthusiasm for continuing the instruction Sarah had provided. Her presence reminded both women that precision shooting instruction created ripple effects that extended far beyond individual skill development. Private Chun, your progress today demonstrates the value of proper fundamental instruction, Hayes observed, recognizing improvement that validated Sarah's teaching capabilities. "I hope you'll take advantage of any future opportunities to continue this type of training." Chun nodded eagerly, understanding that access to instruction from someone with Sarah's capabilities represented opportunities that didn't arise through normal military training channels. "Ma'am, today's lesson changed my understanding of precision shooting more than months of conventional instruction." After Hayes departed and Chun began her journey back to Camp Pendleton, Sarah returned to the quiet routine of managing her gun shop while considering opportunities that would utilize skills she'd thought were permanently retired. The consulting proposals offered chances to contribute meaningfully to national defense while maintaining the independence she'd chosen after completing her classified service. The afternoon heat built toward its daily peak as Sarah organized inventory and assisted customers whose needs ranged from basic hunting rifles to precision instruments for competitive shooting. Her shop attracted serious marksmen who recognized expertise when they encountered it, and word of her competition performance had increased interest from shooters seeking instruction that went beyond normal commercial offerings. Private Chun's visit represented something important: recognition that knowledge gained through classified experiences could be shared in ways that benefited people without compromising operational security. Teaching fundamental principles that improved performance created value that extended beyond individual instruction to influence how precision shooting would be understood by future generations. The consulting proposals from Colonel Hayes offered similar opportunities on a larger scale, providing ways to influence military training programs while maintaining civilian independence. Such work would create meaning that justified the restrictions imposed by security classifications that prevented discussion of experiences that remained relevant to national defense requirements. As evening approached and the desert heat began its slow retreat toward night's coolness, Sarah stood again in her shop's doorway, watching shadows lengthen across the mountains that had become home after years of deployments to places that couldn't be discussed with people who lacked appropriate clearances. Her participation in the Desert Eagle Challenge had been intended as simple demonstration of ongoing capabilities, but it had evolved into confirmation that skills developed through classified service retained value that extended far beyond competitive shooting. The recognition from military leadership and interest from serious marksmen created opportunities for contribution that honored her service while respecting her chosen civilian status. Tomorrow would bring new customers, additional instruction opportunities, and continued development of consulting arrangements that would utilize expertise gained through experiences that shaped her understanding of precision shooting under conditions that transcended competitive parameters. The worn rifle that had silenced doubters at Camp Pendleton West remained ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, carried by someone whose capabilities had been proven under circumstances that would forever remain classified, but whose lessons continued to serve purposes that mattered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.